All right, thank you all so much for being here. That was part 4. Before we go ahead and jump into the talk back, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce all of our wonderful actors. So first we have Abigail as woman. We'll have, Manon as man. And then we have Melissa as Pangu. Trystan as Lan Sai-ha. Caroline as Guan, and we have Kana, our lovely stage directions reader, and Zhuang in part 3. So yeah, I'll throw it to Kiernan for the talk back. Thank you all so much.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Kiernan. Welcome to the talk back. I thank you all for coming, of course, and thank you, Daniel, for coming and agreeing to host. So awesome. And I'll just pass it over to you, Daniel.
Let me begin by just asking everyone here to give a huge round of applause to this team. I came off mic to do it, so we're gonna do it old school, right? Secondly, I just want to welcome everyone here again to, and so grateful. We are also grateful for everyone who's shown up to the events this week. This year's work has been extraordinary. And Kiernan and Sofia and all of you, I just want to say that this moved me to tears on multiple occasions during the process of looking at all of these pieces, and also even looking at your research and hearing about your process. So I want to make sure that we share that process with everyone today. But just to acknowledge what a huge thing it is that you all have done. You know, wisdom, I'm not an ageist, and wisdom is often attributed to age, right? But wisdom is about experience. It's about what happens when you're faced with life's contradictions and difficulties. When you get your feet knocked out from under you, you have opportunity to go into the shadow and into the deep place and engage that difficulty, that pain, that confusion, and potentially, right, transform it. And I think of that word of transformation very, very much in line with this image of the butterfly, right? And I think everyone here is probably aware that the monarch butterfly, for example, when it's in the chrysalis, it completely dissolves. The caterpillar completely dissolves. And there are the imago cells that contain the seed of what that butterfly will look like later. So it has to come down to nothing and be rebuilt. And that to me is the seat of wisdom, your willingness and your ability to do that while you're still alive, right? And I want to say that, Kiernan, you have great wisdom, and I thank you for that wisdom. And I thank all of you for embodying that wisdom together. And we should be proud to sit at your feet and learn from you. So with that said, just a quick word about our playwriting program. You've seen now 4 extraordinary work from our senior playwrights, of whom I'm so proud. And what I love is that you can see that each one was so different from one another. And that's intentional. Each of the writers have a very distinct voice, and we prize interdisciplinarity, which you see here, the combination of history and philosophy and religion and identity studies with the creative practice. We emphasize taking risks, and we also want people not to repeat themselves. So I feel like what's been also extraordinary is watching how many different versions of things we can imagine together. So without further ado, I would love to ask Kiernan and Sofia. And again, just another quick compliment to you, Sofia, the richness, the visual richness, and the distinctions. This felt kaleidoscopic to me, like no two things were the same, and I loved that. It was this kind of assemblage of magic, you know, and every time I thought I knew what was gonna happen, you'd surprise us. So would you please, the two of you, talk about your devising process? Because again, this is an interesting thing. Very often in traditional theater, we have a director, a writer, a cast, you know, the design team, the production team, and everyone is asked to sort of be in their corners, but not with this work. You all entered a radical and beautiful process together with one another. So I'll ask you to talk a bit about that process. And then I know that you and your incredible cast have chosen some pieces from your devising process to share with everyone and discuss kind of how you went through the process of developing the work from that seed. So I'll turn it over to you two, and let's try to take about 15 minutes or so to do that, and then circle back with a couple of other questions. I'll let you know when it's about 2 minutes away.
Sure. So we started developing this play 2 years ago in a McMahon living room, just sort of talking over. I was like, hey, I have this, as I mentioned in the prologue, I have this scene on my notes app, and I keep rewriting it and I keep coming back to it. And I just need to do it. It's like part, at the time, I was going through a lot of life changes and coming to terms with my own self. And Sophia's like, yeah, great. Whatever it is, let's do it. Let's do whatever we need to do. So I ended up not being able to finish that scene, which was scene 2 or part 2, and like none of that is left. But what I was writing instead was the prologue, because I felt like there was so much behind this play that I needed to explain that couldn't be explained typically in like a 2-person scene. There was so much that I was thinking about. And so on the first day of rehearsal, all we had was the prologue. And listening to everybody's feedback and what they were drawn to was really, and then obviously the devising stuff, was really what helped me to write part 2. And then we had a fun playwriting workshop with the ensemble to write part 3. And then from part 3, the conversations we had around that is really what enabled me to write part 4. So it was a very process-oriented thing where each part really, really had to lead to the next part, and I couldn't have done it without a team of people to help talk about ideas and talk about what we're drawn to based off of the prologue, based off of part 2, 3, 4. So it was really great.
If I could, Sophia, just throw in one quick thing that has to do with what you just described, Kiernan, that I think is important for our audience to underscore, that you just described a process for what a playwright can be in a devising world, right? And so often we think about the playwright as being someone who works totally independently for a vast majority of their time, who ideates alone and who populates the world alone. And the quality that we often assign to that is a standard that doesn't often apply. We think, oh, if this isn't authored by one person, it's somehow not, as fine a work. And you're saying, no. The role of the writer in the room can be as a kind of alchemist, and that there can be a collective understanding. So I just wanted to put a point on that, and then I'll shut up.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's exactly why, we've been talking about this play forever. And I think the prologue existed since like February of 2020. And then like COVID happened, and then it was sort of like left to the side. And then we were like, oh, we have to change what we're doing. And then still only the prologue existed. And then I directed my thesis. And then in December, I was like, Kiernan, what's happening? And then still only the prologue existed. And I was like, okay, like that's fine. You know what? Like if we can't write this in isolation, then like let's write it in the room. Let's get a group of people together and figure it out. And what's so wonderful is that what you were describing, Daniel, like the butterfly image, that came from the rehearsal room. That was not something that was like even remotely anywhere near the initial initial play and the initial concept. And it's something that came out of the work and became so central to the piece that like those are things that we would not have discovered. And now I like this play feels like my baby too. And so I feel super connected with it. And I think like this way of like working like from the ground up, I think is so important, especially I think with pieces that are like so personal. I think it really helps to like see how it's personal for other people too. And sort of get it out into the world and then be able to craft the piece together. And so I really loved being able to like find all the things and see how this piece has grown just from conversations that we had both in inside and outside of the rehearsal room, which is really, really awesome. Yeah.
And so would you all be willing to talk about some of these particular examples? I'd love to hear from your creative team, from your actors, and from anyone else who'd like to voice in.
Of course. All right. Let's see who's on we'll spin the wheel of fate. This is Abigail's piece. Abigail, if you want to talk a little bit about this piece.
Great. Yeah, and also just to talk about like the devising process as a whole. I have actually only acted in like pieces done by our playwrights for all the 3 shows that I've done at Fordham. And something that is so unique to shows that you do with playwrights is that it's a real like collaborative environment. And that's something that I really value both in the studio and also just in Fordham Theater in general. It's something that I think is at our core and that I continue to treasure. So yeah, and this piece was, I believe we were talking about, this is from the parables. So we were talking about the parable of the butterfly lovers. Did I forget what this was briefly? Yes, I did. But this was from the parable of the butterfly lovers, which, as they mentioned, became so central to our piece and to this whole thing. And here you can kind of see I fully like walked out into my yard, taking a break from Zoom. I walked into my yard earlier in the day before rehearsal, and I was like, wow, these sticks that my dog has chewed up, they're gonna have a new purpose. And the flowers were just starting to bloom in the yard that my dad had planted, I think over quarantine. They've started to like work on the yard. And for me, it was this real, a combination of like everything that, because obviously, you know, Zoom theater and what quarantine has meant to me. And this piece was like, is both a representation of the parable of the butterfly lovers being separated by this thing that being of the same kind yet separated, and then also just me and my experience during quarantine and with Zoom theater and being separated from everything that I love, everyone that I love, because I'm here at home and still feeling connected in some way. So yeah, that was this piece for me.
Yeah, and what was really fun was figuring out how to devise over Zoom. I'd only ever, you know, you devise and you get in the space and then you just start moving is normally what a devising process is. And then I was like, wow, we can't do that. What am I gonna do? And so it was a lot of just like reading things and then talking about it and then reacting to it and making something and then reacting to the reaction and then seeing what we could learn. And it was a lot about like interpreting stories, which I think is really central to this piece too. And so that was, and I remembered like seeing the piece again, I was like, oh, right. Like we did do a lot of that, like just like an image, like make an image sort of thing and see what happens. But yeah, just another tidbit.
Awesome. We've got a little writing piece here. Not little, it's great. By Melissa. Melissa, maybe if you wanted to read this out loud and then explain about your process behind it.
Yeah, of course. Okay. Can you fall from grace if you have never touched grace? He keeps consuming, he keeps reaching. Each victory feeds his hubris until even the gods are silenced in fear of his fury. I'm not afraid to say that I hate him. I am not afraid to say that I am not afraid. He can't do anything to me because to me he is nothing, which would anger him because to him he is everything. Yet he keeps ravaging. He keeps devouring. Though the sun cowers at his fingertips and the sky surrenders itself onto his back, I am not afraid to say that I hate him. I am not afraid to say that I am not afraid. He has hurt and stolen and shamed people, which angers me because I wish to heal and give and uplift. He keeps stretching, he keeps conquering. He is afraid to say that he hates himself. He is afraid to say that he is afraid. He is afraid of what is next. He is afraid of where he will go. He is afraid of losing what he has and also not gaining enough. He is afraid that we are not afraid. as he should be. Anyway, that was a poem about Sun Wukong. That was created during the devising process for part 3. And so I was doing research on Sun Wukong, and Kiernan gave us an assignment to write a piece about what we discovered. And as you can tell, I really do not like him. And if you watch part 3, you can definitely tell that I don't like him. And I just had a very strong opinion about Sun Wukong because I just didn't like what he did in his little myths. And so yeah, that was pretty much my process just for writing that, and it was pretty fun because it helped me. It was helpful to have a strong opinion on the myth, because it helped me create a piece. It helped me create part 3 and have a distinct perspective for part 3 and how Pangu feels about Sun Wukong. And so, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I really loved the perspective. Here we go. We have a movement piece right here. Kana, did you want to say anything about this and maybe describe your experience on the project, being sort of working on 2 things at once, even?
Yeah, it was a little laggy, Kiernan, not gonna lie. But I'm not moving like that. Just wanted to clarify, I'm moving a little bit more slowly. But no, yes, I was doing it very much asynchronously for this project because I was on Water by the Spoonful and I couldn't be there most of the time, but you guys were very nice about it, and they were like, it's fine, just do it asynchronously. And so they gave me all the prompts, and I was for this one specifically, it was based on Lan Ciahe, and they're just Lan Ciahe is one of the 8 what are they called?
One of the 8 immortals.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. And we just looked at Sofia's just board and the images of Lan Ciahe, and Lan Ciahe doesn't really identify as man or woman, dresses like a man, dresses like a woman, but has the voice of man. And it's just very that fluidity was very interesting to me. So I included kind of just moving around, just bouncing around. I just picked a random song that kind of fit the vibe, and that's just improv stuff in front of in my room. And the little thing that I had in my hand was it's like a little tiny bell from Japan, and it's just to represent, because Lansai has music, and they also just they sing and they dance, and it's just like really like nice and fun. So I just had that in my hand to make a different sound separate from the music. And I don't know, I was having very like just fun, and fun and like just bouncing around in my room. And I just liked that like shot because Michelina has a beautiful view of New York, and then I changed it to black and white because it looked cool, and it's just that.
All right, we've got time for a few more. Let's see. There we go. Manon, do you want to talk about this piece?
So I want to clarify this by saying, in my opinion, the main thing I brought to this process was being a silly Billy. I came in to every rehearsal wanting to have fun, and I succeeded every rehearsal. And I really had such a blast on this, and this I feel like is just the perfect encapsulation of my process, because so basically this is another interpretation of the butterfly lovers, and instead of going out into nature and using that to recreate the feelings of isolation with the good thing Abigail did, I was like, what if I gave my stuffed animals knives? And that was my so this is a very literal representation of the story. I made a binder out of a napkin and put it on one stuffed animal to represent, Zhu in disguise. And then how would they know that they're in love? I know, little mind bubbles with hearts. But this process was so much play and experimentation, and finding what intrigued me about all of these stories. And all of my family in the comments are sounding off because I've had the sloth since I was 5 years old. But yes, and then when in the when people were responding to it, they thought it was so deep that the stuffed animals had knives, and it was like showing the softness with this sharpness and how they can hurt each other because of the tragic end of the tale. And I feel like that's it too, is that I do things that I think are silly, and then people find them profound. And then I say, yes, you're right, they are profound. But this has been the best process. I've loved every minute of it.
Awesome, thanks, Manon. We got time for one more. Let me find it. Here we go. Oh, that's not it. Here we go. Caroline, do you want to talk about this mood board here?
Yes, for sure. So the devising process for me was a totally different way to explore the stories and these characters. And so this was a mood board I created with pictures from online and Pinterest, largely inspired by Sofia had like a mood board for the whole show. And so this was for Guan and the butterfly lovers, which was the myth that I wrote for in part 3. I just did this for part three. And so I was really trying to get to know Zhu and Liang, because I feel like at first glance, like when I first heard the story, it just seems like a very likely like star-crossed lover story that I feel like we're all familiar with, like the Romeo and Juliet-esque story. But then when I was able to get to know them through like these visual representations, it really helped me like give them their individuality, which I think that they really have, and it just helped me understand their story so much better. And I think that we really see that in part 3. And so basically there's a lot of images, like on the left you can see Guan Yin, and there's a bunch of images with the red string of fate, which is another myth that complements the butterfly lovers very well, and just this overall like feeling of like longing and desperation between them, and in the end loss, but then they're still reunited. So that was kind of all the thoughts that went into that.
Wow, wow, wow. So I was in this morning, I was in a conversation at Sundance. There was like a panel roundtable type thing. And one of the things that came up was this really interesting image that one of the panelists brought up about how she missed food that everybody touches, like the kind of food that gets made by hand and like, and passed around, and like bread being kneaded and dumplings being made by hand, and how much she's looking forward to going back to that kind of food, because it's invested by touch and it's invested with love and intention. And I just, even looking at this series of prompts and responses brings that feeling to me, that there is something about when those shadow puppets show up, right? When that animated butterfly moves, it's suffused with all of y'all's intention. Like it's full, it has great meaning. And I think that's an important thing to recognize about your process, is that it's handmade, and that the aesthetics of a handmade thing and the value of a handmade thing lie, again, outside of some of these externally imposed ideas about beauty and about worth. This has value because it was made by you. This has value because it was made both for you and for an audience. This has value because together you were at work on a very large project, which is what I want to get to next, which is this question of story and this question of narrative. And I have two questions that I want to spin out into the world. And the first is actually, a number of you can probably address this. So don't feel like it has to be you, Kiernan, or Sofia. Although I would love to have your thoughts on it. But the question has to do with, you know, the moment we're in, the conversations, especially in this last year that we've had, that have been so charged, fractious conversations around representation, right? Who gets to play what part? Who gets to tell what story? And what it means to negotiate those lines within a nation in crisis around historical abuses of representation, and around a moment of profound reckoning, both in our larger culture and within the American theater, right? So here you all are bringing story from another culture, from an ancient time, and you're bringing it into this present moment with deep intention, and you are also inhabiting it. And I was thrilled to see in the prologue the conversation that you all had as a very transparent part of the process, describing what it meant to you to do this work, why you did it, and how you did it. And my ears perked up because I said, oh, it's moving. We're not stuck in these binary conversations. You all gave us a door to walk through. And, you know, not everybody's gonna want to walk through that door. And I'm sure people got critique of the door and all the stuff like that. And let's get into that. But I would love to know what that process was like for you of discerning that. And for all of you, what was that like to play? What did you find challenging? What were the breakthroughs? And what does it mean on the other side of it? How did it affect you or change you? And please, anyone respond.
I'll just say, there's a there's a line in the prologue where we're talking about my process of learning the myths, especially from our dramaturg Austin and through my own research. And I think it's something like, I could BS these or I could half-ass these, but it's important to me that I completely try to give myself over to this and try to empathize. And I think that's really what was my approach throughout the process, was to try to empathize and try to immerse myself in the stories and in the world. Because if I didn't, it wouldn't feel whole for any of the parts. That it really mattered to examine every facet and acknowledge, you know, where I'm coming from, where I'm coming at them, but that there was a window in. And that was really important to me.
And I have a parallel thought. If you would like to hear it, we can also move on. But I, like me and Abigail, were not as involved in the writing of the myths and the researching of the myths. Basically, we would come back from rehearsing part 2 and see all of these amazing things that our cast members had made and be like, what? But so yeah, a lot of this process of like representation and figuring out how to play this character was about realizing all of the ways he is different from me, even though in some ways he is kind of like an archetype. Like the character's name is Man. And I had some anxieties and some insecurities at the beginning that the reason I was cast was because I was trans and there are not that many trans men in this program. And so learning not to play the character as myself and play the character's experiences as my experiences just because we share this core facet of our identity was honestly the big hurdle for this production. That was the character, figuring out where I ended and the character began. And I know that's for every part, but for this especially, to realize that my experience of being a trans man is different from the man's experience of being a trans man. And that was very exciting and eye-opening, and I think helpful for all the parts I might play going forward.
Manon, and that's precisely what I'm talking about, like that we're, you know, it's a complicated thing, right? Because there's also the school of thought, and I think the movement to say that, you know, the casting should absolutely consider identity and embodiment and lived experience, and the ways in which that collides with the idea of the transformative actor who can move in any direction that they want to or need to and become whoever they need to be in order to tell a story. So I love that you were able to kind of have both things buzzing in you at the same time. Like I know that who I am is part of why I'm here, but it's not all of why I'm here. And that dynamism, again, it makes space. There's room to move, to breathe. You don't get stuck. So thank you for teaching us with this process, all of you. Thank you for teaching us. Another question, and this is gonna be for you, Kiernan, but I want everybody's opinion, you know, y'all pile on. I had to stop the YouTube at one point because I had to get up and walk around. When I get up and walk around because something strikes me, I'm like, yes, you know, or I want to fight it. And in this case, it was an Amen Corner moment when you talked about the boyhood that never was, right? This idea of the shape of a life, that it has mass, that it has form, and it has energy, and that, you know, being raised as a girl denied the opportunity to be raised as a boy, and but that raising, if you will, and go with me or everybody in this audience, that raising has mass and form. It has a physical presence. It's almost like it's just over the veil in another dimension. And what I thought was one of the places where you demonstrated the wisdom I'm talking about, Kiernan, was your ability to articulate it in such a way, all of you together. And again, I'm curious about where that actual line even came from, like how it all generated, right? But that idea, for me, says there is a relationship that we can have to trauma. There's a relationship that we can have to a difficult history or to a thing that we have conflict with in our identity that is not based in resistance, but is rather based in a kind of acceptance and curiosity about what else could be. There is within the Black American tradition this strong understanding that when you do healing work on yourself, you actually heal your family line back in time, right? The idea that we are still in an active relationship with not only the multiple generations of people we come from, but with the former selves that we are. I go back to that image you all brought up earlier about the rings of a tree. So that's a big observation, but I want to ask you kind of talk about where that insight came from and how that may have operated as a principle in this process? Because it felt like that sense of curiosity was just replete.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the lines that on the first day of rehearsal, we all noticed and we all latched on to as one of the guiding parts, especially something that I was considering all throughout writing part 4 is how to resolve that. Because, you know, it's difficult. It is part of the trans experience is to go from one gender to another usually, and it's a lot. And there is an approach where you can completely burn all the pictures of yourself from as you were a child and forget all the lessons you learned as a child. But that's, I think, kind of a fantasy. I don't think you can really completely reject your upbringing, or you're going to miss a lot. Not everything in my childhood is none of all the lessons I learned, even the gendered lessons, were negative experiences for me. I still see them as a part of me and important foundationally, both for myself just as a person and for myself as a man too. There's so many ways to arrive at becoming a man. And so it's always been important to me not to reject parts of myself that maybe don't align with my current identity, but that there's a way to always incorporate them into who I am. And I think that really is what guided part 4. Yeah.
I think, and this is going to tie into the first question you asked, Daniel, as well. But for me, where that line kind of fits in is that I have a very fraught relationship with Chinese culture, just because of my parents. And that was kind of something I brought into this process, like wanting to explore Chinese culture, but then being unable to like separate it from all the experiences I've had in my life. And I think that, yeah, I think that what this process and embodying the character of the woman has taught me is that like the journey that she goes through herself of like learning that maybe she doesn't know what it means to be Chinese, and maybe that's okay, and maybe like things will take time and that's fine. I think is a lesson that I don't think I've learned, but I've started to learn just through the process of embodying her. And I think that that's something that I've really taken away from this process. Just the, I mean, like I know that like trauma is important to recognize, but and it is like an important part of who I am. But then kind of treating myself with like the care that I would have wanted, like my old self with the care that I would have wanted, I think is the other thing. But yeah.
Sofia, were you going to say something too?
I think the question of like how to end all of this was such a big question from the beginning, and which is why part 4 is what it was, because it was written very recently. And I think like duality is something that's really important to me, and hybridity is something that's really important to me. And I think I really pushed that, and I was like, but what if they don't know? And the entire time I kept asking that question. And I think that's something that really, like really came in and became a huge part of like accepting the unknown, I think was so important. And for these characters and for the story as well.
Yeah. If I could pick up on what Sofia was saying, and learning about Lan Ciahe, it was interesting because Lan Ciahe lies between like these margins of femininity and masculinity. They are androgynous, right? One of the androgynous deities. So it was interesting in this process to kind of like, well, I had to check myself in playing this character and to say that like Lan Ciahe is not static. They're not static within this binary, but they themselves are movable, right? And there was such a temptation within me to think of Lan Ciahe within this binary, like masculine and feminine, and they're both. But perhaps there's trepidation within Ciahe as well, or insecurities within Ciahe as well, about being on these margins. And what does it mean to be on these margins, to not necessarily feel attached to either side? What feelings do those provoke as well? So I think part 4 kind of talks about that, and it really combusted my idea. And especially, I think it was personal as well. As a person who is often, I would say I consider myself androgynous, who often challenges gender norms and things like that. It was interesting for me as well to like understand that even within a binary system and being in between it, there's still nuance. Nothing's ever static. And it was so fascinating to learn that process, and to go through that process myself, and to learn it thanks to this beautiful, beautiful project. So.
Amen corner over here. And your performance was so beautiful too. Just want to lift that up. I mean, everyone's, like I could wax poetic for a long time, but hearing you say what you just said, I'm like, I'm good. I can go now and raise plants. I'll see y'all. Because that, I've been trying to teach this my whole career. I'm so elated to hear you all speak in the way that you're speaking, because it reflects an understanding that in order for us to generate anything new, make any kind of healing or possibility, we have to move away from the idea of certainty, stasis, and fixity. And these are overhangs from our colonial settler, infrastructure of thought. Our ontology is colonized around the idea that who we are is static, right? So that work is tough work, but it takes a lot of people, a lot of therapy, a lot. Sometimes several therapists, they burn them out, so that y'all got this now. You can buy shoes instead and just be fabulous as you walk through your life. That's what I expect, lots of good shoes. So I just want to give another thanks to all of you for your incredible work. Can we have another round of applause for everyone? Yeah, and then as a point of privilege, I would like to ask, please, that Daria and Alexis and Jenny please come off, open their cameras for a second, would you, please? Are you going to join up? Will you do it? Are you only listening? Are you secretly in the kitchen? What's happening? All right, there you are. And I'm taking this moment as head of this playwriting track because I want to say something to you all. When I interviewed you all, I knew that you were going to change our program. I felt it in my belly. You were the foremost extraordinary people I'd met in terms of the people I've worked with. And I'm going to say this, it has been the honor of my teaching career to work with the four of you. I am so moved by what you've done. I'm so impressed by your fortitude. You've had many blows during your time here at this school. You've had to figure out, in the dark, the flashlight battery died, there was a fire. It was like you had to work through solid rock to make some of the things happen that you made happen. But consistently, you have been profoundly generous with each other and with our program, and you have modeled quietly, clearly, and powerfully what it means to do your work and not get caught up in drama. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for setting this example and for, I believe, changing the trajectory of our program for the better. I thank you and I love y'all and I'm gonna miss you tremendously. I'll be with the plants, so it's good. So I would now ask if anybody wants to ask a question. We do have time for a few questions from the audience, so please pop them in the chat and I will happily ask them. Or we could talk about what kind of shoes you want to buy when you are free. I just got some red shoes and I like them. They're cute.
I do have to go out and buy my graduation shoes at some point, so that'll happen.
What you gonna get, Sophia?
I think I'm gonna get some like nude heels with like a chunky heel and like strappy because I'm wearing like a floral dress for graduation. Very excited.
You are? That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Don't do suede because it might be muddy.
No.
Even where you are, even though we're gonna be inside, you know, the mug could be inside. Yeah, so I guess we don't have questions. Is there anyone else who'd like to share anything who didn't get to say anything on your heart at all?
I mean, I'm just so grateful to have gotten the opportunity to do work on this play, for Kiernan for trusting me with it, and for this amazing group of people that we assembled, us and our designers too. I know some of them are in the chat. It's just such an incredible team, and I really I didn't do anything. All of it came from the people in the room, and all I said was yes, no, maybe. And we did the thing. And so I'm just really, really grateful. And I just wanted to share that because this could not have happened without everyone who was involved in this process. And so I'm just really, really grateful.
Well, thank you. Please celebrate yourselves. And we have one more event, which is this evening's production of The Nether, which looks phenomenal. It's a movie, y'all. Come see, come movie time. Popcorn and new shoes. I like that together. And I just want to give a special shout out to everyone involved in putting Studio Fest together. Extra special shout out to Melanie and to Bryce and to Austin, to Sean, to everyone who's really kind of, done all of the work to set up the infrastructure for this process. And then finally, once again, to all of you for the dedicated work and for giving us such inspirational material to sit with. And we thank you. All right. Much love, everybody. Bye.